The History of the Mongols. Part 1. Origins and Rise to Power. The history of the Mongol Empire is one that most people have heard about, but not many know the details. We'll start with their humble beginnings and take a look at how they grew into an unstoppable force that would change the world. Genghis Khan was born in 1162 to a small tribe of Mongols known as the Borjigid. The Mongols lived as fierce nomads across the steppes of Central Asia. They were mounted archers who traveled from place to place with their flocks of sheep and goats. Their tents were made of felt, and they followed a shamanistic religion. When Genghis was 8 years old, his father, Yesugei, was poisoned by rivals. Years later, when Genghis was 20, his father's brother, Temujin, refused to share the family's portion of the spoils after a raid. So Genghis decided to raid his uncle's camp. It was here that he captured a man named Ho Ilun, whom he would later make his right-hand man. Ho Ilun's tribe were the Tatars, and they had a lot of beef with the Mongols, so Genghis knew if he wanted to unify the tribes under one banner, he'd need to capture them all. He sent for his wife and mother, who both were hostages with the Tatars, and managed to broker a peace deal with them. In 1190, Genghis unified the Mongol tribes under his banner. He then set his sights on the Western Xia, a Tangut kingdom that had been raiding Mongol territory. Genghis fought against them at the Battle of the River Kalgan, where he used a new tactic of feigning retreat to lure the enemy out of their formation. This proved so effective that the Xixia army fell apart. After the victory, Genghis took many of the Western Xia's cities and established garrisons in them. At this point, his growing empire needed a name, so he called it the Mongol Empire. From there, Genghis turned his attention to his old rivals, the Taijut clan. They were led by Jamuka, a former friend of Genghis who had betrayed him after their father's death. In the ensuing civil war, Genghis was nearly killed when Jamuka ambushed his camp. However, Genghis came back with a vengeance and defeated Jamuka, killing some of his men and capturing his family. With internal enemies dealt with, Genghis now turned his eyes to China. In 1127, the Jurchen people founded the Jin dynasty in northern China. Now, although the Jurchens were further north than the Mongols, they were much more civilized. They had built great cities like Beijing, which at the time was known as Zhongdu. But despite being more advanced, they also suffered from internal strife. And because of this, Genghis was able to trick them into a war. He sent a diplomatic mission to the Jin emperor, asking to be his vassal. But when they arrived at the court, he instead demanded submission. When the emperor refused, Genghis declared war. Although the Jin army was 10 times larger than Genghis's, they lost badly at the Battle of the Yellow River. The reason for this is simple. Although the Jurchens were more advanced, they were still stuck in the same old ways of fighting. Their armor was heavier, but their bows were weaker. On top of this, the Mongols were simply better horsemen. They could shoot while riding their horses and use the terrain to their advantage. In fact, even today, the title of Mongol is synonymous with horsemen who can shoot arrows. With the Jin dynasty pushed back, Genghis now set his eyes on another power in the region, the Kara-Kitai, who ruled over much of Central Asia. At the time, the Kara-Kitai were a peaceful trading nation, but they were being ruled by a mad queen. She had usurped the throne from her own father and murdered her siblings, and now she ruled like a god over her people. Genghis wanted to put an end to that. In 1201, he began his campaign against the Kara-Kitai. At first, it seemed like a good idea. Many of the subjects of the Kara-Kitai welcomed the Mongols as liberators. But then, things got ugly. Genghis pursued the retreating Kara-Kitai forces all the way to the city of Bukhara, a major hub of trade and culture. There, they made last stand, but Genghis's superior cavalry was too much and he took the city. While he spared the common folk, he showed no mercy towards the nobility. He crucified them, drowned them, or burned them alive. Now, although Genghis Khan was responsible for the deaths of millions, there's a common misconception that he was a savage who enjoyed killing. In reality, he was a cunning tactician. who was only willing to kill those who stood in the way of his empire. For example, during his invasion of Khwarezmia, he spared the life of a wise Muslim cleric named Muhammad al-Juwayni. The reason was that Genghis wanted to convert him to Islam. He thought that if such a prominent cleric could join the Mongol Empire, it would surely bring more people into his fold. After the destruction of the Karakitai, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the Khwarezmians. The Khwarezmians were Persians who lived in modern-day Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, and at the time they were ruled by a man named Muhammad II. You see, Muhammad had conquered parts of Persia, Mesopotamia, and India. He was a wealthy man, but he had made powerful enemies along the way. And Genghis saw an opportunity to make allies by taking out these enemies. For example, the Shirvanshah dynasty were his neighbors in Azerbaijan. They had been constantly raiding his lands, so Genghis made a pact with Muhammad to take them out. But Muhammad went back on his word and attacked the Mongols. So Genghis did the only thing he could do. He declared war and set his eyes on Muhammad's capital, Samarkand. The Khwarezmians were excellent builders, and they made full use of the fertile land of Persia. As Genghis approached, they burnt their crops to prevent them from falling into his hands, but this ended up working against them. You see, the Mongol army was largely self-sufficient. They had livestock that they used for food, and they carried around portable dwellings. So when the Khwarezmians burnt their crops, the Mongol army was hardly affected. On the other hand, Genghis's soldiers kept plundering their countryside, meaning that by the time they reached the capital, the Khwarezmians had starved. They surrendered the city without a fight, and Genghis entered it on July 1220. Now, we mentioned earlier that Genghis was not a fan of rulers who massacred their own people. Unfortunately, Muhammad was just such a ruler. According to Muslim sources, he dipped his bread in the blood of children. So when Genghis entered Samarkand, he decided to make an example out of its ruler. Muhammad fled the city, but Genghis caught up with him outside the city walls. He offered Muhammad a chance to surrender, but instead he taunted Genghis and told him to get through the gates first. Now, the problem was that the gates were made of iron and reinforced with thick wooden beams. Even if Genghis's men managed to break them down, they would have to deal with the elite soldiers guarding the other side. But Genghis had a solution for this. He gathered all of the criminals he had captured along the way, gave them weapons, and told them to storm the gates. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain, and so they charged with all their might. It wasn't long before the gate burst open and the Mongol horde thundered through it. Genghis rode alongside them, leading the charge. The Khwarezmians couldn't withstand their fury, and soon the city was theirs. Genghis ordered his men to spare the women, children, and elderly, but to kill every able-bodied man. They pillaged the city, destroying its infrastructure and burning its great libraries. The massacre lasted for 40 days. But Genghis didn't stop there. He chased after Muhammad through the mountains. He attacked his rear guard and forced him to flee deeper into Persia. Genghis continued his onslaught, conquering cities along the way. He killed anyone who stood in his way and spared anyone who submitted. Before he died in 1227, he had transformed the world forever. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. But sadly, his successors would destroy it all. You see, after Genghis died, his empire was split among his sons and grandsons. They kept expanding it, but in doing so, they weakened it. Eventually, the empire split into two halves, the Yuan dynasty in the east and the Golden Horde in the west. Both of these would go on to conquer more land, but neither would last. Today, there are only a few Mongol groups left in the world. Most of them live in Mongolia and China, while others live in Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the US. Sadly, their way of life has been mostly forgotten. Once they were the most feared warriors on Earth, but nowadays they're mostly farmers. Well, except for one group, the Kazakhs. They're descendants of the Kipchak Mongols, and they live in a mountainous region of Kazakhstan. Until this day, they live as nomadic horsemen. Click here to watch one of these next videos and let us know in the comments who should we do a video on next.